Hello everybody and welcome to the show. My name is Peter Pittenry and today we're speaking to one of my best friends, Willem. Willem has been a farmer for the last 10 years and recently qualified as a mountain guide. Today we take a look back at our 2017 Drakensberg Grand Traverse, roughly 210 kilometers as we ascend the escarpment via the chain ladders at Sentinel Peak, then to summit Mont, the source of the Kwazulu-Natal's Tugela River, Cleft Peak, Champagne Castle, Mafadi, the highest point in South Africa at 3,451 meters, Giant's Castle, Thabana, Ntlenyana, the highest point in Southern Africa, in Lesotho, at 3,482 meters, and descend via Thamathu Pass to Bushmans Nek. With an elevation gain in excess of 9,000 meters, running along the edge of the escarpment at high altitudes, frequently crisscrossing the border between South Africa and Lesotho, over 34 ridges and accompanying valleys. I've never been prouder of my wife Hanlie and good friend Willem. It was a truly fantastic experience and I hope you enjoy. Cool. So today we've got Willem Milman. I like to refer to him in my dreams as the Bethlehem Buffalo or the Afrikaans Aragon. Today we're going to be profiling the Drakensberg Grand Traverse that we did together in 2017 along with my now wife Hanlie. And we're going to start with a brief introduction from Willem, and then we'll go straight into our experience.
Okay. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Willem Milman. I'm from the Eastern Free State, one of the most beautiful areas in our country. And at this stage, I'm a farmer. I've been farming for the last 10 years, and I'm trying to get a foot in the door in the tourism sector. And I'm a newbie in the tourism area, but I've done some traveling before in my life, and it's an experience that I would like to share with other people of all ages. So most of my travels was done in South Africa, and then I've done a fair bit in South America as well, which is up till now the epitome of my travels, I can say. But or let me rather say, until we did the Grand Traverse. The Grand Traverse was really a unique experience. I'm glad we can speak about it today.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that it was a unique experience. But Willem, I mean, you went over to South America just in briefly. I mean, I might have the story completely wrong, but you went over to South America to work in the sort of farming sector. And somewhat down the line, you changed paths and actually operated as a dentist, possibly.
Okay. So what happened is I volunteered as a manual laborer for a non-profit organization, and they at that stage tried to establish a farming college or agricultural college. They've got lots of potential there to farm with tropical fruit. So I started with the manual laboring, and then there was an opportunity to work with a group of medical students, and it just happened. In South Africa or most countries in the world, I guess it's almost impossible to get the opportunity like that. But in Peru specifically, there wasn't a lot of red tape, and it was, I guess I was in the right place at the right time. And I ended up helping the dental team specifically. And then later on became the leader for the dental team. So we didn't do any major stuff. It was just extractions and a bit of cleaning.
I say that every time I speak to someone, my hands have already started sweating. The previous one, time my hands started sweating, I was speaking to a guy, Theodore Lever. I don't know if you've met him. He's a guide in Cape Town. But so he was telling me about his experience on Mount Kenya, and the last pitch, how he sort of pre-soloed it and had 3 quite close calls. And now you're telling me, dentistry and tooth extraction is not a big procedure, and I'm just trying to sort of get my head
Well,
around
at
just
least
going to the dentist.
thinking back on it, yeah, my hands start to sweat as well. But I mean, if you're 18, you're keen to do anything, and
Sure.
yeah.
So, I mean, keen to
Well,
do anything. That kind of fits in nicely with how the GT started for us. Hanlie and myself, Hanlie was a dietitian in Vicksburg in the Free State, and she initially went over and did a community service year there. I joined her and worked from home for most of the time, and then probably about 2 months in, she said to me, "Oh, by the way, I want to do the Grand Traverse in the Drakensberg." And I think I'd hiked in the Drakensberg once before when I was very young, and since then hadn't again. So she said she essentially wants to do the Traverse. Can you research what it's all about? So being in Vicksburg, I ordered all these maps on online somewhere. And they slowly but surely, I'd ordered two because I thought, okay, we're going to do the chain ladders close to Vicksburg, and that should be the sort of extent of it. So I got the first two maps, and then quickly realized the actual extent of what you wanted to achieve. And we hadn't met yet, but Hanlie and I had started reaching out to all our friends in the mountain club and asking them, listen, do you guys want to join us on the Traverse? It's just Hanlie and I so far. We're really interested in doing it in August or September. Is anyone keen? And we were planning on starting on the 5th of August. And we asked you probably, when would you say, Willem?
yes, if I have to, this is just a guess, but I think it was like 2 weeks before we actually started, yeah.
Yeah, and you only gave us the final feedback about 5 or 6 days beforehand, saying, "Okay, I'm keen to do it."
Yeah, it might actually have been a week. I'm not sure. I can't recall properly, but it was really on short notice. Yeah.
And what was your preparation for the Traverse?
Well, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for anything. So what I just told myself is, if I can just be mentally tough enough, I can take the physical beating. Like, yeah, if I can just put one foot in front of the other and keep myself mentally fit, and then I can do it. But I must say, I was a bit concerned because you two are of the fittest people I know. And
I appreciate that, because I think it's a sort of an overstatement a little bit from your side, because you know a couple of really hardcore people, but I do appreciate that. But carry on.
No, even amongst the hardcore people I know, you're still some of the fittest.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was a bit intimidated by that. And I haven't done anything of that nature up until then.
Mm-hmm.
But not as long. I've done some overnight hiking, but not really that long, as I said, and off trail, of course.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I went and bought myself new boots, hiking boots, because I only had valleys at that stage, and I was also concerned that I might not have enough time to break them in before the actual hike started. So I bought, I think it was the K-Way Expedition, or what exactly, the Kili Expedition boot or something like that.
Yeah.
And they're extremely waterproof, which means that your feet also get wet if you start to sweat.
Mm-hmm.
Not wet from outside, from inside. And after I bought the boots, I realized that my feet is sweating a lot in these boots, and obviously wet feet leads to blisters and stuff. And yeah, at that stage, I just told myself, as long as I can put, even if I do get blisters, as long as I can put one foot in front of the other, blister is not going to stop me, and I'm just going to tough it out. Mental strength is the only strength I've got. I'm not really as fit as I want to be for this.
Yeah.
And yeah, luckily it never happened. I never got blisters. It actually went really well.
Yep. I think we were very, very lucky. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump straight into there's a video element to this as well. So for the viewers, if you want to go and see, on the screen I'll essentially just put the Google Earth imaging of the actual route that we did. So essentially, Willem, we started off at your farm, which is, in the car, and your wife and a good friend of yours volunteered to drive us to the car park, and then we proceeded. I think we must have left at about 3:30 or 4 in the morning from your farm, which is about an hour's drive. And
yeah, I think that's about correct.
And then we arrived at Sentinel car park. Take me through kind of what happened from the car park area, and let's try and finish off at and for everyone listening, I apologize about the pronunciation. Again, I don't know the Berg very well. We had a bunch of maps, like you can see behind us, and then we had 2 GPSs that we would put on, and track where we needed to go. Get a point of reference, switch it off to conserve battery life, and then we would hike for the better part of 2.5, 3, 4 hours, and then check our location, rework our direction, and then carry on like that. Myself, Willem, and Hanlie. So Willem, Montauk Sources, that was our first real kind of peak, I suppose, 8 kilometers in. Take me through your kind of recollection from Sentinel car park.
Yeah, so the first day was actually a bit of a heavy day for me. Even though it's the area of the Drakensberg that I'm most familiar with, it was more the fact that I was saying goodbye to my wife, and I was still a bit dominated by your guys' fitness. So I can recall that when we started, my good friend actually carried my bag for me. My wife and my friend hiked with us all the way to the top, and then they turned back. And he actually carried my bag. And the reasoning behind it was that I thought, no, you guys are just going to fly when we get to the top. And I'm going to need all the help that I can get. So Chris actually carried my bag to the top. And I spent the last few hours with my wife. And then when we got to the top and we actually said goodbye, was the most difficult part of the Grand Traverse for me personally. I can remember feeling extremely heavy, saying goodbye to my wife, and especially because we live on a farm, and it's dangerous times living on a farm these days, and she would be on her own on the farm. But yeah, from there on, it just got better. Every day just got better, and the experience was. Yes, yeah, I would highly recommend it to anybody. But yeah, after we backed the first summit, the Mount Exor summit, we actually went into Lesotho a bit and started to meet with some of the shepherds, or not directly, but we started to notice that we're not as alone as we thought we would have been. I thought, I can't recall exactly at what time of the year we did this. Was it August?
Yes, yeah, we started on the 5th of August, and then we hiked for about 9 days. We finished on the 13th of August at around midday.
So I thought at that specific time of year, due to the harsh weather, that there would actually be a lot less shepherds, but we did encounter quite a few of them, and it was actually a good experience to interact with them a bit and to see how they live, and so on and so forth.
What really stood out to me was how little they actually live with. I mean, we encountered, this is further down the trek, but we encountered someone just sort of climb on the start of the climb to Thabana and Ntlenyana, and
Yes.
he was hiking back, and
I
we'd
recall
actually
him.
met his brother down in a valley somewhere. I mean, there were hundreds of valleys, but and he was just taking a bag of mealie meal to his brother that would last him for a certain amount of time. I can't remember how long, and that was, you know, what they had to survive through the winter, which was crazy to me. And you know, he was hiking from Sani Pass, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken, and he was wearing jeans, tackies, and a hoodie and a jacket with a little
Yeah.
backpack on.
Yeah. It really makes you feel fortunate for all the privileges that you have.
Yeah, and kind of puts you in puts it into perspective how sort of, you know, you plan and prepare. Well, Hanlie and I planned and prepared for about 6-7 months, and got all our gear ready and made sure we had the absolute lightest. I must say that you know, I'm overly happy that I got to do it with you and Hanlie. Hanlie, for me, was the standout star of the whole traverse. I mean, she carried 4 kilograms less than us, and she still had a 28 kilogram backpack, which is incredible for my limited experience hiking long treks. You carried about 32 kilograms. I carried around 32. And then, Hanlie carried about 28 kilograms. We did pack most of the first 2 days of food in her pack, so it got lighter, but not by much. And, you know, she's a dietitian, so very fortunately, she could prepare all the meals for us and work out exactly our caloric sort of intake that we needed every day. And the food, we actually ended up carrying 1 day extra food just in case. And we carried all our food for the 9 days. How was the food preparation and the gear preparation from your side? What did you feel that was lacking, and what do you think that we overcompensated for possibly?
So yeah, I'm glad you touched on the food. That is, I think, one of the major contributors to our success was Hanlie's planning on the food. I really want to give credit to this. It was absolutely brilliant. So when we started out, and I remember when we actually packed the food into our bags, yes, I got an extremely concerned feeling that we are going to starve. And when we actually started the hike, and even after the hike, even now thinking back to it, I think it was one of the most well-planned areas or factors to contribute to our success on the Grand Traverse. The food was more than enough. The energy intake, I never felt fatigued or tired. And it was extremely light and packed well. So yeah, I really want to compliment Hanlie on that.
And I think, Shane,
it was good. It was good tasting as well.
We were very fortunate in that I think we were quite strict because we were limited in manpower or woman power, I suppose, that we were going to try, and the factors that we could control, we were going to try and control them as best we could. So the food preparation started 4 or 5 days before the actual hike started. We started dehydrating most of our vegetables, so to make sure that we still got some veg. And I think after 4 or 5 days, some dehydrated veg still tastes quite good when you start hydrating and cooking it again. But we had very set tasks that we had on the hike. I remember on the first night we hiked past and we set ourselves a goal. We were going to either try and reach Fang's Cave, which was about 21 kilometers in, and you can see over here the Fang's Valley, and then Fang's Cave is on this ridgeline down here somewhere. And we couldn't find Fang's Cave, so we pushed on, and our second planning point was Ruanka Cave. And I went through the photographs.
Wait, wasn't if I recall correctly, we aimed for Rattle Cave. We actually made it to Rattle Cave. And when we got to Rattle Cave, we were like, no way, we're not sleeping, three of us in the Rattle. And then we actually pushed to get to Fangs Cave. I can't recall properly, but I think we did miss Fangs Cave.
Yeah, we
Or we
missed Fangs
struggled to
Cave.
find it.
So on each night where we were looking for caves, I normally bargained for if there were 3 caves or 2 caves at least in the area, I would then put those on as a point, because remember we'd spent 1 week before this in July on the MCSA July camp hiking in the Berg.
Yes.
So we
Yeah.
kind of knew the distances that we could cover in the mountains, and it was around 20 to 23 kilometers a day. But we had a lot lighter packs. We did the Bell Traverse. So we thought, okay,
Yes.
this is going to be substantially harder, and we're going to be carrying almost double the weight. So I'm going to plan for 21 kilometers as a sleeping point, and that was Fangs Cave. And then Rattle Cave was at around 20 kilometers into the hike, I think. So we actually got to Rattle Cave, and we sort of, because it was almost getting dark, so we thought, okay, maybe let's sleep in Rattle. But then, like you said, you know, the 3 of us wouldn't have fit in there. And so we pushed on to look for either Fangs Cave or Rwanka Cave, which was about 2.5, 3 kilometers further down.
Mm.
And then we missed it. We couldn't find any of the caves.
Yeah, and the wind was crazy. We almost lost our tent. It almost blew off the mountain.
Yeah, and
when we tried to pitch it,
and we had a 2-man tent.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Yeah, it was a tiny tent, and we slept 3 of us. I slept in the middle. Hanlie slept on my right, and then Willem slept on my left. And we would squeeze in like sausages, and you couldn't really eat in the tent together. So essentially, what we did was I would start the food. I would boil the water. Then I would climb into the tent. The first night was the first night that we also got a bit of snow. So it was the coldest of the nights, I think. And so I would start the fire, and I'd get in, and Hanlie would start preparing our sleeping area. And I remember the first night, Hanlie and I actually got into the tent, and we sat down, and I'd planned sort of escape points on the mountain as we progressed in case something happened. And we heavily considered the next day, because we would be going past just before Easter Cave, there was a drop-off point. So we heavily considered, you know, that first day was hellish for us. I mean, we were really hiking quickly, and Hanlie and I had a quick cry in the tent, and we thought, look, I don't know
I didn't even know.
Yeah, we were howling in the tent, but you were busy cooking, so we decided, okay, let's get through to this evening. Let's get some food in our bellies, and then the next morning we'll make a plan. And fortunately, you finished up all the food, cooking the food, and then we managed to squeeze in. I think I sat in the vestibule, or you might have sat in the vestibule of the tent, and then Hanlie and I ate, and then we went to bed. And that was our kind of first day on the hike. Do you remember anything else that sort of comes to mind?
I do recall that my camelback actually freezed up like just before we pitched tent. So yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, that was strikingly bizarre for me. I mean, we didn't have a lot of water when we got to the campsite that night, because the last water source was about 4 or 5 kilometers back. And I mean, you can see here, we had lunch next to Oxbow Shortcut, and there's a river that flows through here. We can, I remember, I've been through the photos, and I can actually see we're camped out for lunch very close to the river to our left. And, you know, we carried on with that river system pretty much until we turned up towards Fangs Valley Saddle. And so we hadn't had water, you know, for the better part of probably 7 or 8 kilometers until we got to our tenting spot for the night. There might have been another source of water over here, but I can't really recall. I do remember the last water point further back, but I remember you had about
I think it was at lunch. Yeah,
it was at lunch, and you had a half a camelback left of water that we were going to cook with, and like you said, you put it down on the floor. I remember it was lying on top of your bag, and you picked it up.
It was in the pipe. I think the water in the pipe actually froze. I'm not sure if the whole bag did.
It might have been my camelback, but I remember there wasn't a lot of water in, so I mean there wasn't much to freeze. But within 45
Mm.
minutes of us trying to pitch the tent and level everything out, it had frozen solid, so it was fairly cold. I think that had a lot to do with why we were shedding tears.
Yeah, but yeah, we did survive the night.
We survived the night, and then the next morning.
The next morning, we started to get our psych back.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I think the first morning of the hike, after our first night out, was actually one of my most memorable. We hiked down to the river. Probably we woke up at about 4:20. I set my alarm every morning, and then we decided not to have breakfast because we didn't have any water left, and we wanted to conserve what we did have left for the hike down, and we knew that there was a water point below, so we hiked for about an hour and a half. And we got down to the river as the sun started rising. Do you remember that first morning in the mountains?
Yes, I do. I still recall the snow on the frozen river. Like not lots, but there was some signs of snow on the river.
Yes,
the snow that fell the previous night.
Yeah, and the river had actually frozen solid, right?
Yes, yeah, it was solid.
Yeah, and our responsibility was I would start the cooker again. Hanlie would sort of get all our wet clothing dried from the previous night on the rocks, and then your responsibility was?
I recall that I actually wanted to go for a bath that specific morning, and it was more cold. I think for the next 2 or 3 days I didn't bath again. But I also recall that I washed dishes in that cold water and sliding it back to Hanlie over the ice.
Correct.
And yeah, it was difficult washing greasy dishes in freezing cold water.
Yeah, I remember, that was the first kind of morning that I'd thought, all right, this is actually quite fun, food preparation and cooking. We try to sort of keep ourselves entertained and highlighted with sort of small things like, filming and whatnot. We only had one battery pack to power the phone, and that was predominantly just for photographs. And then you had a tiny little Nokia that you'd purchased at a pep store or something the couple of days before, so that you could call out in case of emergency.
Yes.
Cool.
I can't really recall much more of the second day.
Yeah, that second day was quite a difficult one. We were aiming for Easter Cave, and we had about, I think, 23 Ks to cover. And we also had to, if I'm not mistaken, was Cleft Peak on day 2?
No, Cleft is
day 3.
A lot further. I've got the guide there, so I can check if we must.
So I know we camped out on Easter Cave, and we had that would take us to around 45 kilometers for the 2 days. So we had the better part of 23, 24 kilometers to go. And so we can see here, we camped out at Easter Cave on the second night, and that was the first sort of cave experience that we actually planned for and found. Do you remember the cave at all?
Yeah, it was it the cave that's sort of on a steep?
Yes.
We sort of had to go over from the Lesotho side over a steepish hill. It was on the escarpment side, on South Africa side.
That's right. Yes.
A lovely view.
Yeah. So we reached the base of Easter Cave at about. Now, we sort of told ourselves that we wouldn't hike at night. We had 9 days. We would get through comfortably if we just allotted around 22 to 23 kilometers a day, and then 2 days we would have towards the end that were a bit longer as we got fitter on the hike. So we got to the base of the peak at about 5:36ish, I think, and the sun was going down at I think 6:30. Just before 7, the sun would have set, and we hiked up the base of the mountain, and we overcooked it a little bit, and we had to hike around and then back down the other side. And there's there was a narrow gully that you hike down with quite a lot of
Yes,
exposure,
yes.
and then you come into the cave in the front.
Yeah.
And then we had.
That was one of the most scenic. What would you call it?
Viewpoints.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got some photos that I'll share on here as well. That we woke up with this beautiful sort of highlighted mountain peak and South Africa in the distance, and it was quite special. We had breakfast, and then the next morning we plummeted down back because we were quite high up at this point, and we always tried to finish up in a high area because we were quite scared of camping low down on the ridge. So we added a bit of distance to our hike, but because there was only 3 of us, I know you were quite safety conscious, having grown up in the area, and we'd heard some stories from the MCSA that if you leave your shoes outside, they sometimes get stolen.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to risk anything like that, especially us just being 3. So we camped quite high up, and then we always tried to leave just before breakfast. If we didn't have enough water, but fortunately there was a river that we got some water before that big trek up to Easter Cave, where we got water, and we had enough for breakfast the next morning, and had a very scenic breakfast in the cave, and then we carried on hiking for the next day, day 3.
Yeah, with hindsight, I can say with confidence that I think you're a lot safer in the Berg than in most of South Africa. So yeah, I don't think safety is it's something to think about, but yeah, no need to be too concerned about.
Yes, yeah, hindsight's always 20/20, I think.
Yeah, the people we've met up there, the shepherds and so on, also my experience was that they have a lot of respect for the hikers, and they treat them with respect, and they actually kept their dogs away from us, and they didn't try to intrude on us. Sometimes they did beg a bit sometimes, but yeah.
I mean, as can be expected, I think if you're in the mountain, I can't imagine what I would be like without a slab of dark chocolate every now and then to treat myself with. So,
exactly,
not having much, when they do see a hiker, they do sort of ask it. It's more often just for, I think, for carbs, sweets, and cigarettes. We've got a lot of as well. But I think as hikers, I don't know that there are too many smokers out there, so I don't know that they get restocked and supplied with too many cigarettes
too often now.
Yeah. And that was we went through Tsetseki path, and we were aiming for Yodler's Valley as our 3rd stop overnight, and we were going to tent out there. So we carried on hiking, and this was where we I don't know if you remember it, but we were on the escarpment. We had South Africa on our left, Lesotho on our right, and we kept we stopped over at about lunchtime.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
If I recall correctly, this was the day we encountered who we suspected to be the Dagga smugglers.
That's right. Yes.
Yes, and then we decided to keep our to contour and stay high on the peaks instead of sleeping in the valley where the huts was, or something like that.
Correct. Yeah. So that was after Cleft Peak, between Cockade Pass and Cleft Peak, on this ridge line. We went through a sort of a small saddle, and a lot of there was a lot of cloud cover that came over and formed. This whole valley was full of mist. I don't know if you remember that, but it was completely, I mean, you couldn't see maybe a meter in front of you. And we picked a point out, and we actually found it was one of the only real paths that we could see. There was actually a hiking path. And I assume that it's from a hiking route that comes up for Cleft Peak. So we got onto that hiking route on the escarpment, and we just sort of walked for about an hour through the mist. And then I've actually got a nice photograph that I'll share as well, where we stopped and we pointed out Cleft Peak, and you can see it sort of pushing its nose out towards South
Yes.
Africa.
On what day was that? Was that the third day or the fourth?
That was the third day.
Okay.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you don't really realize how much distance you cover, but we were aiming to cover around 23 kilometers, and Cleft Peak, as you can see, is about 55 kilometers into the hike. And
Yes,
this was the first time that you would have been able to speak to Janice in 3 days.
Yeah, I still recall making a phone call from the top of Cleft.
And I'm quite, I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a fairly sensitive person, and I get very chalked up about the fact that I can't grow a beard. So when I see a man known as the Bethlehem Buffalo who can grow a massive beard and still cry, I feel honored to be in someone's presence like that. So take me through how you kind of felt 3 days in, not having seen your partner. You guys spend all your time together and do most of your adventures together. What was that phone call like?
Yes, I can't really recall that I had difficulty with that phone call, but as I mentioned, the first day was the toughest for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was nice to speak to her again and to know everything is fine. That was one of the things that concerned me the most, was whether she's fine. Because if something goes wrong with her, I won't be able to
forgive yourself.
They won't be able to contact me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was comforting to know that everything is well, and by that time I really started to enjoy this hike. So I almost didn't want to go back.
I remember when we got to the top of Cleft Peak, that's really where we sort of settled into the hike, and then we just sort of focused on, okay, we've got distance to cover. At 10 o'clock, we're going to stop for 15 minutes and we're going to have our snacks. And then we're going to stop again at 1 o'clock for 45 minutes, and then at 3 o'clock for 15 minutes, and then dinner time when we actually reach our camp spot. So this was quite an enjoyable section for me, going past Roland's Cave. We hiked up and we contoured, and I think we reached a little bit too far up, so we had to drop down a little bit. And I actually used your phone to just send some feedback to my folks, because we had a bit of reception at Roland's Cave. And Roland's Cave was a little section down, and I mean, we saw on the map the route guide that we were just above Roland's Cave. I've never actually been there, but do you remember the section down? It looked quite sketchy.
Yes, yeah, it did. I recall as we passed, there was a few cairns leading to Roland's Cave, I assume, or the path that's going down, and
that's right.
Looked terrifying.
Yeah, it just sort of, it's a sheer left hook and into the abyss, really. I've not been there, but it did look quite scary.
Yes. I think if you don't have a backpack on, it would be less concerning, but to traverse into Roland's Cave with a backpack, I haven't done it before. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it looks worse than what it is. But yeah, I think it's a experience to keep in mind, to plan for.
Yes, and I mean, the Berg there's so much to do. I think when you do the traverse, you kind of take it all in, but after the fact, you realize that how much you actually could have done in that area. But it's one thing I love about it, sort of, a 2 or 3 day hike versus a 9-day trek, is that you actually get to experience the area and you enjoy it. And if there's snowfall, you can go play in the ice and, slide on your bum and whatnot. And this was actually one of from Roland's Cave, we started descending down into the valley, and there was quite a bit of snowfall in this ridgeline. I don't know if you remember, Hanlie was quite a way in front of us. And I got quite concerned because she just took a tumble and slid all the way down the ice. And I thought she'd hurt herself, and she was just lying there. And I started running down to her, and I got to her, and she was like, "Oh, I'm just resting. I'm all right." And she would often do that. She would hike out ahead and then, rest a little bit and wait for us. I always seem to be at the back. I think I'm one of the slower hikers. So this is I don't know if you remember, but we were quite concerned because there was quite a big communal sort of Lesotho village down here in Yodler's Valley entrance, either here or further down in here.
Yes, I think that's where we encountered the potential dagga smugglers.
That's right.
Yeah.
And instead of going down into Yodler's Valley, I think you made the call that we stick on this ridgeline and we just contour as high as we can. And this was probably the worst night for me just because of the preparation for the campsite. We hiked up onto this ridgeline. There was a water point, which was quite nice, but it was all quite steep. And then we got onto the top of this ridgeline. I think I marked the campsite incorrectly. Yeah, we actually got onto the top of this ridgeline. And there was another group of campers with headlamps on that we could see in the distance over on that side.
Yes. Yeah, it seemed like they were above some pass on the escarp, just above the pass.
That's right.
On a flat section there. They did actually tell us when we left Sentinel car park that there was a bunch of South African military personnel.
I see.
That was busy doing the traverse as well, patrolling the traverse or something like that.
I see.
So I wonder if it could have been some of them.
It could have been, yeah. And that night, do you recall what made it so uncomfortable? I mean, I have the flair for exaggeration slightly, so I might have just experienced it a lot harder. But I think for an hour we were just trying to get not fynbos, but vegetation out of the way, just so that we could find level ground and clear rocks and whatnot for our campsite.
Yeah, I do remember that we struggled to get a nice flat spot, and we did have to remove a lot of rocks and did a bit of preparation. I can't recall lots of vegetation.
I think I was quite persistent in getting a good night's sleep. I'm a miserable person to be around if I haven't slept. So I remember taking my hiking poles and poking out vegetation and pulling roots out and maybe leaving the big rocks for you.
Well, if it's true that you become a grumpy person when you're tired, then you did an exceptionally well job of hiding it. you were always like a motivational Superman.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Just seemed like you never got negative from the whole thing.
Yeah, and that the next day was really, I think, where it struck me for the first time that we might encounter some issues, and a little bit of negativity came in, and that was probably we hiked down into this valley. We had breakfast again in the morning, and then we got water, and we passed quite a stunning pool down here in this valley somewhere where it was fully frozen, and then at the point it was quite a big river, and it had made like a whirlpool, I think, and a big circular enclosure in the rocks, and it was also frozen over solid, and that was the start of this hike up into Pampering Saddle.
Pampering Saddle. Yeah, I do remember.
That was a miserable climb.
You can't forget it.
I don't remember what our elevation gain was, but I do remember being very miserable on that ascent.
I don't care what the elevation gain was, or whoever said it wasn't that high or what. It just lasted forever.
And the reason I think it stuck out was that was the last point that Hanlie's brownies ran out, and we started eating jelly babies. And those brownies got us through the first 3 days. It was a yerba mate, honey, and I think macadamia nut butter blend, energy cookies, and had so much caffeine in them they'd give you headaches after you'd taken one. But they really got us through. Well, they got me through those first 3 or 4 days.
Weren't they supposed to only last like for the first day? Or?
Yeah, they were only supposed to last us 2 days, but I was quite sanig about them, so I tried to conserve them as much as I could because they definitely gave us a big boost.
Yes, yeah. No, I was grateful for him as well.
And this is, I think when we got to the top of Pampering Saddle, we then we were probably, well, not probably, we were about 70 kilometers into the hike, not quite halfway yet, but our stop off for that evening was going to be Leslie's camp. Do you remember what happened in this stretch?
Yeah, I do recall being fatigued, especially in the later hours of the day, and especially after that climb out of to the top of Pampering Saddle. And at a certain stage, the fatigue and my burning legs became the only thing my mind was occupied with. And then you started some sort of a game. I can't recall exactly what the game was, but even to this day, when I'm hiking with kids or whatever, I always remember when you get to that point, you need to just to distract yourself and the persons around you, just to keep the morale high. And
yes, I remember that quite fondly. I mean, that was we played the name game. So just for me, it's why I started this podcast. Like, storytelling is such an important element to connections with people. So you would just say like Albert Einstein, and then you would obviously everyone knows Albert Einstein, so you don't have to tell a story about him. But if someone challenges you and says, okay, well, that's not a proper person, then you have to prove it by telling a story about that person, what they did and how they became famous. So if I say Albert Einstein, you would then finish off with a name that starts with an E, and then Hanlie would go with it's a very popular game, but I don't have to explain it. Yeah, but we must have played that for about 2.5-3 hours until we got to Leslie's Saddle, because this was
and it actually kept us going. It made a huge difference.
It did. That was, I remember there was I'm not a big fan of the flats, surprisingly, because they become quite monotonous. It's just this trudge. I've got some video that I'll add here as well of us just sort of knocking on. And the start of it was quite pleasant, but eventually, without the climbing to distract yourself and, the tricky descents to keep your mind proactive, it does get quite boring. So that was a nice little thing to keep us busy.
I'm not sure if it was on that day or the next, but we actually contemplated to buy one of the shepherd's horses or donkeys.
Yes, we were trying to figure out how much money we had with us to try and persuade him.
And later on we decided, no, screw it, we'll just steal one. We'll just steal one if we go past one again. And
yeah, we were going to barter with food, and as our food ran out, we didn't have much else to barter, so we contemplated theft. And that's where we spent the night at Leslie's camp. Fortunately, there was quite a bit of water, really pretty, and there was actually a Lesotho mountain hut here as well. But we didn't want to, I don't know if that's the name, mountain hut, but we didn't want to actually go across in case there was someone staying there or invade their space. So we just camped on this side of the river. We found a nice little flat spot at Leslie's camp. It was really nicely put together. A very fond memory for me, except the fact that Hanlie every night would make me come with her to, so she'd be able to bath. She bathed every single night, and it was so cold that night. She was cleaning herself with a cloth, standing in the river on a rock. Put the cloth down next to her, and the cloth I picked up to pass it to her, and it also frozen solid. I could hold it flat in my hands like that. And you were busy cooking at the time, and I remember we had our last custard for the evening. What? Yeah, that's what I think.
No, I'm just joking.
What was happening, but I remember that night. That was the only sort of memory that stuck out to me. But a fairly nice campsite, definitely one that I would say is a nice aiming point. It's 86 kilometers into the hike, and it's not going to be hard to miss.
For sure, yeah. No, if you're camping in a tent, it's or let me say it this way: one of the nights spent in a tent on the Grand Traverse, that was the best campsite.
Yes, I agree with you completely. It's easy to find. We didn't have to route find a
Yeah.
lot. It was
Water,
conveniently
nice flat,
located.
soft ground.
Exactly. Yeah, that was perfect. And yeah, that was the only thing that really sticks out. And then the next day, we were aiming for Jarreteng turnoff. I think the second Jarreteng turnoff. There wasn't anything that stuck out on this day. This was actually where I was quite happy that you'd taken on navigation, because for the first 2 days or 3 days I think I was navigating, but then it became quite evident that you'd actually gotten a lot stronger than both Hanlie and I on the hike, and you were consistently hiking ahead, and your route finding is much better than mine or Hanlie's, and you were
Yep.
nailing it every time. I mean, we would where we
Thank you,
left,
Peter.
we reached the top of Mafadi Ridge, and I've never actually hiked with you before on anything this distance, or where we had to use compass map and map navigation. We obviously had the GPS, but we used it very limitedly because we only had
Yeah.
pen light batteries, and we didn't want to run out in case we couldn't find ourselves in the mountain. And
Yes.
so you would whip out the map every sort of hour and a half, and we got to the top of Mafadi Ridge, and we had the established line, but there was another point where you could actually climb off over this peak and then contour on that ridge line, which was a lot easier because it brought us into the next section. So we didn't have to actually go all the way peak Mafadi and then come down. We could actually traverse down. It was a lot easier, and it cut off probably about an hour or two, because we'd gotten to our lunch spots surprisingly quicker than I'd thought.
Yeah. To be honest, I can't recall much of that section. I just recall the Mafadi summit, that's all.
Yeah, it was a very interesting day, because down here this was brutal. This drop down into this valley here. I mean, our knees.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was about 3.5, 4 hours of just like constant downhill. Your knees were just falling apart. It was a shocker.
And there was lots of ice.
Lots of ice, yeah.
On steep terrain, which was actually fairly dangerous as well.
Yes, I remember Hanlie taking another fall there as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a long white slab of ice that Hanlie actually traversed across onto and stood on, and we took some nice photos, which I'll share as well.
Yes.
And then we trekked through this valley. Sorry, carry on.
No, I recalled as we descended into the valley, the vegetation got a lot more of an obstacle.
A lot more dense.
There was dense, yeah, and it was difficult at times to get through in, especially in the lower sections of the valley.
Yes.
Until we got to a nicely, what would you call it, often hiked path.
Yeah, and I think that was evident.
Picked up speed again.
That's right, and that was around here in Jarreteng when we saw some sheep, and I don't know if you remember, but there was just a random herd of sheep. We didn't even see the skarpwachter.
Yes, I do recall now.
And you and Hanlie were hiking quite a way ahead of us. I wanted to. I took a little video here and celebrated the 100-kilometer mark by myself. You and Hanlie were just too fast for me, but I'll share that as well. My celebration and horrible photograph and videography skills. And then when we reached Jarreteng Turnoff 2, that's where we camped. We again always try to keep our height, so we camped a little bit higher up on the ridgeline. And then I don't really. Do you recall this evening?
No.
Remember, we hiked through, and there was a bunch of there was quite a steep face on our left, and then we went through. We crossed over a river a couple of times, and there was a Lesotho encampment or settlement.
Yeah.
That we went through, and we were actually contemplating. We looked into a couple of the houses to sleep there. It was completely abandoned. But then we carried on going, and then we camped a little bit further up past that.
Yeah.
And the next morning, when we started hiking again, we actually saw we were having breakfast, and there was a guy sitting above us, watching us eat.
Yes. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, that was the morning.
I do recall the images, but I can't actually place them on the, on the time scale.
Yes. Yeah, this is when it
link
all
them
got
to a day.
Yeah, this is where it all got quite a little bit confusing for me. I had one of the scariest days. Was it Mogotlong? I think we slept at Mogotlong Path, Startway at the Bend, if I'm not mistaken. And then the next day, on the way to Sani Saddle, this is when, yeah, that's it. So we hiked on, and where am I going here? There, Mogotlong Bend. We slept here, and then the next day we started hiking, and Hanlie had started feeling a bit fatiguey, so I put a belt around my waist and strapped onto her bag, so she would hike behind me, and we would sort of hike in a daisy chain, and we hiked that way for the better part of the day.
What was this day?
This was day
7, 6,
4, 5, 6. This was day 6.
Yeah. Okay.
And we started hiking. It was just before we reached. So the next day, day 7, would be the day that we summited Thabana and Ntlenyana. So, I mean, I'd like to, we don't have to go through each day systematically, but this was the day that probably stands out, and regrettably one of the days that Hanlie, it's sort of, when anyone asks me about the GT, I always highlight this day, but just because of how scared I was when this occurred. But Hanlie had started feeling a bit fatigued, and we were going to camp on quite a high summit over here somewhere, and it might have been in the saddle. I think, yeah, it was Thabana Putsua saddle. Probably about, I would say, that was our second longest day so far. It was a 25 kilometer day. And we finished off that day with a big climb. I don't know if you remember, but there was a river next to us, and it was very vegetative. I don't know what the proper wording is. But it was probably a 2-hour climb to finish. And we aimed for the summit, and we were going to camp at the summit, and we just pushed. And when we got about 3/4 of the way up, Hanlie and I, we tried to sort of speak to each other quite constantly, just to sort of motivate. And you would do a lot of the route finding. So when we got to you, we would always chat and try and keep our spirits up. But Hanlie got very quiet, and she had the belt around her, and I wasn't pulling her, but I was helping her along. Again, I think the 7 days in, your body starts breaking down a lot of the muscle storages and fat storages. And she's quite a small person to start with, tall, but not a lot of fat and muscle storage. And she went and sat down when we were about 3/4, almost to the top. And I turned around to look at her, and her eyes had fallen, gone back into the back of her head, and I could just see whites in her eyes, and she started shaking. Do you recall that moment?
Yes, I do recall. I was quite a bit in the front, ahead of you guys, and I recall that I heard the panic in your voice, and when I turned around, you already were busy undoing your backpack, dropping it, and getting to Hanlie, and but I think it took me about 2 minutes or so to get back to you guys. And by then, Hanlie was conscious, but a bit confused. Like it looked like she wasn't really aware of what exactly was going on. And I can recall you actually handled it pretty well.
Well, shout out to Wild Medics. I mean, they do quite an extensive wilderness first aid course that they kind of drill into these scenarios, and they make it quite real. And whether I reacted well or not, I was very concerned because she was unresponsive. I put my bag down. I did a collar, I don't know what you call it. You've recently, I think, done a wilderness first aid course,
Yes,
but when you
I
tap the
did.
collar to see if you're responsive,
Yes.
so I tapped her collarbone, and she was kind of, I think it sends an echo through your, uh, hopefully to try and, get a little bit of attention back from her. Fairly unresponsive. It was bugging her a little bit. I was quite aggressive about it. And then, I assumed one or two things. My first assumption was that she just didn't have enough food in her. She hadn't stopped over, or she was dehydrated. And she didn't seem to be dehydrated. I'd made her stop quite often on the last sort of couple of hours of that hike because I knew she was struggling, as were we all. And
Yes.
so I immediately took a handful of sweets and put them into my mouth and sort of chewed them up and try to make some sort of glucogel. Is that right? I think I recall this.
So by the time I got there, you were already busy with this procedure, which was awkward to me. But so I recall you still being actually busy feeding her.
I see.
This not feeding. Sorry, my English is making it difficult for me to communicate complicated stuff. But
essentially, I think I was just trying to distribute the
get some glucose in her system,
into her system. So I was just spreading it in her gums and trying to sort of get her to swirl it around her mouth and make sure that she got a little bit in. But fortunately, it wasn't that serious of a case. We were quite far into Lesotho. I mean, if you scroll across, I mean, we're quite a way away from the escarpment.
No cell phone reception.
No cell phone reception.
We were completely on our own, and it would have taken at least half a day to get to even cell phone reception.
That's right. So it was quite a stressful situation, but thankfully you offered the next day. I mean, she eventually came to. We fed her, put her in the tent. We had actually a lovely night there. It was everything was so green. It was right on top of a waterfall. It was really, really nice. We went down and got water. You volunteered for that night to cook the food, and I just sat with Hanlie and we kind of ate, and we had a fairly early morning. Her storages were quite low the next day as well, so I don't know if I think I carried a bag the next
you
day in the morning,
this,
and then
you actually carried it for quite a bit and refused to hand it over to me, and then eventually we started to take turns on this. And but if I recall correctly, Hanlie actually started out pretty strong.
Yes, that's right.
The first few hours of the day.
That's right. Yes, and then
and we had a massive climb and then a massive drop again, and on that drop, on that descent somewhere.
That's right.
She started having difficulties again.
That's right. So we were dropping down. We climbed through, and we actually traversed this mountain pass over here. And we dropped down into this valley, and this is where we had lunch at around, snack at around 10. And she started feeling quite bad again, and then that's where I took her bag, and then we hiked up and we traversed. There was a lot of snowfall, and this is where we met the guy taking food to his brother or cousin.
Yeah.
And that's where we
just
summited.
After that, we summited Ntlenyana.
That's right.
However you pronounce it.
Yeah, and that was quite a special moment for me, because I think that's where we realized, okay, we're almost done. We've got a fairly, I wouldn't say easy walk into we were going to hike into Sardini Saddle, and then just spend the night a couple of kilometers past the saddle. But we were actually a day early for the meetup with my parents. So we carried food for 9 days in case we didn't meet up with them. And we had enough food to push through, but we thought we'd get onto the road because Hanlie wasn't feeling great. We actually got onto the road from Sani Backpackers. probably about
Yes.
7 or 8 kilometers up from the backpackers. And we thought, okay, well, we are early. Let's actually hike to the backpackers on tar, and
Yes.
we'll get there a lot quicker. And at this point, you were carrying Hanley's bag. I just remember
Some of it, yeah.
the stark difference between walking off trail and on tar, and the tar was brutal. My knees were, after about 2
Yes.
kilometers, my knees were
It was
actually
a
terrible.
dreadful little section of the hike.
Yes.
Yes, I recalled it as well as being tiring and unpleasant,
And then
any other negative word you want to add to it.
And then for some reason, mother bear instincts kicked in, and my parents decided to come up a day before. And for some unknown reason, my mum was terribly worried, and along with my grandfather and my father,
like all moms,
just started driving up. And we met them after hiking about 2 or 3 kilometers a day before on the road, and it was surreal that they came around the corner, and I was like, "Hang on, that's my grandfather." I had no idea that he was coming, and then behind them in the next car was fortunately because of the way we smelt, was my dad and my mum in a bakkie. So we chucked all the stuff in the back of the bakkie, and then we drove down to Sani Backpackers and had probably one of the most comfortable nights of the GT.
So I've been to Sani. What do they call themselves? Sani Top Backpackers, I think. There's another one. Sani Backpackers is on the bottom, and then
I see.
Sani Top Backpackers is the one on the top. But I've actually spent quite a few nights at Sani Top Backpackers, and we've done a motorcycle trip, and we've done some trips in off-road vehicles and so on and so forth. But yes, there's nothing that compares with the feeling of hiking into Sani. It's just amazing. Even though it might not be amazing in that context, that whole setup is just amazing.
It was very special, and the owners of the backpackers were very pleasant with us. They allowed us to book in and sleep at the backpackers with very little pre-warning or booking. We also had a full 3-course meal, which was phenomenal. And
breakfast as well.
Did we have breakfast there as well?
I think we did. No, we didn't.
We left very early that morning with my mum's soup. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I do. No, I think I'm recalling a motorbike trip.
Oh, right.
The breakfast, yeah.
And Willem, you don't drink alcohol, but I could be wrong. But I remember having a beer, a day before the end of the hike, and it was probably the best beer I've ever had. After a good long slog.
Can you recall which beer it was?
It was definitely a Maluti. I think that's what they call it. Yeah, Maluti.
Yeah, it's a Maluti.
Yeah, it was a Maluti Long Tom, the 450 ml, and I think I had two maybe within the space of 10, 15 minutes. But we had to get out there fairly quickly because we hadn't showered yet, and I know Hanlie was clean, but I definitely wasn't. I think I'd maybe bathed once or twice the whole trip. I can't speak for you, but I did not smell good.
No, I did both here and there.
Fair enough. I don't think I smelled too pleasant.
Let's not go into the hygiene routine of the hike.
So this was, obviously the next morning. We've been going quite a while, and I'd really appreciated the distance that we covered, but we still had 2 days to go. I'd left when I say I'd left, I'd just done a lot of the route planning ahead of time. So I was quite strict with where we had to sleep every night. Sani Backpackers wasn't in the fray. So the next morning we didn't want to hike straight back up onto the tar road because we just sort of a little bit counterintuitive. So we went slightly off route, and we aimed for this Ntlenyana saddle, and we hiked across, and we were going to meet up with our route there. And we pushed through, and that night we slept over in a camp or in a cave. But I don't remember what the cave was called. Do you?
No, I don't. But let's see. Maybe it's mentioned in this guide. I do recall that we actually struggled to find it.
Yes.
It was marked on the GPS, but for some reason, yeah, especially in those gullies in the Drakensberg, the GPS tends to be less accurate. And I think it was it dark?
It was dark. Yeah, it was a fairly long day as well, and we could smell fire. So we knew that there were people quite close to us. And normally hikers wouldn't make fires in the Drakensberg. They would have their gas cookers or stoves. So we were kind of a little bit scared that we were hiking close enough to someone, and we didn't want to kind of get involved with any of the locals, just because there were only three of us, and not that the locals are sketchy or anything. We didn't want to put ourselves into a situation where we felt compromised or we imposed on someone else while they were hiking. So I remember being quite anxious when we were in there because it was late and we hadn't found a place to stay.
I do recall that there was a nicer cave, but it was a bit of a scramble to get to the top.
Yes.
And we actually decided to sleep in the lower cave, which was a bit awkwardly shaped, and it was difficult for us to fit nicely in there. But it actually turned out to be a good night.
Yes, and
cold, if I remember correctly.
It was freezing. It wasn't really. I mean, it was a cave. It had a small little overhang, but it was very open in the front. And a massive shout out to my mum. We had her oxtail and beef stew that evening. She'd frozen. I asked her just to freeze for our last hike, wrap it in some newspaper for the last night, so we could have a really nice warm cooked meal. But she made far too much. I think she made 4 liters of this stuff. So we actually gave half away to right at the Sani backpackers as we were sort of traversing along to get back to Ntlenyana, I think. We encountered someone and we gave him 2 liters of soup while he was actually waking up for that morning at 4:30, and then we just carried on. So do you remember that?
I remember it. Yeah, it was actually at the village.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And then we had a really nice, pleasant meal, and that was our last night in the Berg, in a tiny little cave. And then we left ourselves quite a bit for the next day. I remember covering quite a big piece or stretch of distance. But that was, I wouldn't say the easiest, but you're finishing up. Very scenic. The Berg is very different in going down Thamathu Pass. And we covered.
You leave the basalt behind you, and you start to encounter sandstone.
Sandstone, that's right. These beautiful formations with very interesting architecture, I suppose.
Yes.
And probably my favorite day, because we were finishing up. We actually didn't know if the border down at Bushmans Nek was actually going to be open. So we kind of just hoped and prayed, and we covered 27 kilometers that day, and we managed to cover it by 3 o'clock. We were done, I think. So we had a fairly early start. Route finding was quite tricky on this section.
It was, yeah.
I remember it took us a bit of time to actually find Thamathu Pass, but that sort of concluded our 209 odd kilometer hike through the Berg.
Yeah, the last day was actually one of, I'll say, the second most difficult day for me specifically. I just remember felt like I was physically incapable of finishing, and I also had a stomach condition.
Yes.
Not sure what exactly it was actually, but yes, I got lots of cramps, stomach cramps, which actually just sat me down. I couldn't hike.
And it's incredible because I didn't mention that, but your stomach cramps started coming in around the second day, didn't it?
Yeah, but it was fine until the last day. Like not fine. It was a problem, but it was manageable. But yo, the last day, no, it just broke me in half.
And Hanlie started
Yeah,
experiencing similar. Her hiking boots. She actually tore her Achilles on her left ankle. So she still
yeah,
got a big knot on the back of her ankle,
yo,
where it wasn't a full tear, but I think she got a partial tear just from that pass going down, because it's just a constant. I mean, I would say 4 hours downhill as you
yeah.
hike off of the mountain into Bushmans Nek.
So the Thamathu Pass is the last pass, but just before the Thamathu Pass, there's another pass, a really exposed
This
pass down the gully,
Isikatulu
sort
pass.
of back into Lesotho, and then you come around a peak, and then you get to the Thamathu Pass.
Yes.
That
So
I recall that those two passes combined was really demanding.
I remember it was a lot of downhill, and there was one big climb out before Thamathu Pass. You actually encountered some nice vultures flying fairly low in this section here, which was quite special. Very scenic, and then the route finding became quite difficult. At the start of each pass, it was quite hard to find the beginning sections
Yes.
of them. Thamathu
Yeah.
was slightly easier, but this pass was, I mean, I
Yeah,
remember
that
the route
upper one
finding.
was difficult.
It was very, very difficult to find. But yeah, then we hiked through, and we finished at Bushmans Nek, and my folks were there to pick us up. Took lots of photos, which I still haven't seen. My mum hasn't sent them through to me, and it's been 3 years. Shows you how
Well,
it
it's
really
been
works.
3 years, and I haven't seen any of your photos. There's in my life, there's no evidence of me being on the GT at all.
All right. Well, hopefully I'll put this out on YouTube and iTunes and wherever you sort of find your
Yeah.
podcasts. And I'll put all the photographs on as well, and you can kind of go through this and track the journey and recall some of the moments. It was a very special experience, and I do appreciate you taking the time to go through it with me. And more than that, I appreciate you as a person and as a friend. I mean, 5 days notice or maybe a week's notice, and then committing 5 days beforehand, it made it made the experience very special for Hanlie and I,
Yes.
and it was definitely something that we'll look on fondly for the rest of our lives. And I'll definitely invite you on the next mission. We're going to try, along with Johan, who's a mountain guide in the Western Cape and one of the strongest runners I know. We're going to try and do a push and run the GT in a couple of years' time. So it's an extension and an invite to you and to him, and
Yes.
we'll have
If you
some
give
support this time, hopefully.
if you give me a couple of years, I might just join.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but if
I'm
you
nowhere
only
fit
give me
enough.
5 days, I'm not. Yeah. No, I'm really, I really appreciate that you guys actually thought of me, invited me, and it was the start of our friendship, which
Yes,
I highly value. And
absolutely.
the GT on its own, I would highly recommend it to any hiker, or for that matter, any person who has the opportunity to do it.
Mm.
It's a life-changing experience. I know it sounds like just a thing to say, and that's why I'm saying it, but it's not. It really makes you grateful for what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, since I've done the GT, I always tell people that if ever I would win the lotto or for some reason inherit a huge amount of money, the first thing I'll do is leave it in the bank and go do the GT just to realize it all over again, that you don't need any of this material stuff to have a valuable life
Absolutely.
and to be grateful.
Yeah, it definitely puts it into perspective. I mean, for Hanlie and I, we were very, very, very fortunate to live in that area for a year. and to experience what we experienced. The whole year that we were in Vicksburg, we spent 4 weekends at home, and those 4 weekends might have been the 4 weekends that we actually got to spend either close to Bethlehem and spend some time with you, or climbing in Bethlehem or Vicksburg, but we had some wonderful experiences, and it really grew our friendship. I think for me, the GT, if you do something like this with anybody, you either can have a very positive experience or a very negative experience. For us, we were lucky enough that we all just gelled together, and it was an absolute pleasure. I've actually, for every podcast that I do, I have my giraffe, and I put one item that reminds me of my guest, and this is the quick draw that you actually took down off of the bridge that I took a fall on while I was climbing, and it's completely sunburnt, and I would never climb with it again. But it's my memory of you being an absolutely stone cold climber, and and rescuing my quick draw off of that horrible bridge that I took a bad fall on.
Yeah, injured your leg actually.
Yes, that wasn't a fond day, but the memory itself was fond, and I really appreciate you, and I wish you all the best with your adventures going forward. I know that having hiked with you and spent 9 days with you in the mountain and climbed with you numerous times, that your pursuit for being a full-time qualified mountain guide will only go well. Have you qualified yet, or how's that been going with the Corona pandemic or COVID pandemic?
So I still need to do a few courses, but I'm qualified in the basic stuff like single pitch rock climbing, abseiling, and mountain walking.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah. Well,
still chasing the multi-pitch, but thank you for having me, Peter.
No, I appreciate you, and I'm sure this. If anything, this will just be a memory bank that we can look back on and recall. Hopefully, whoever's listening to this enjoys the recall of 3 fairly inexperienced hikers trying to take on the traverse and having a very special and lucky experience. We were very fortunate with the weather. We were very fortunate with my folks finding us on the right day. We were very fortunate that we didn't have any serious medical things that happened to us. And we can, I think, just chalk it down to a lot of good luck and limited preparation, and just surrounding yourself with the right people. And I appreciate you for that and taking the time to talk about it today.
Okay, no, it's a pleasure. Go
Fantastic.
well. Be safe.
You too. Thanks, Willem. All the best.
Bye.
Cheers, man.
Bye.